Welcome to Ustick Road Church of the Nazarene in Caldwell, Idaho. This is the Sunday morning service.
I was sitting talking to the pastor at the Free Methodist Church, and he was getting together with the guy, and he says, well, I'm meeting with the guy from David's Hope. I said, I haven't met that guy yet. I said, I need to. I said, I think that would be a good person for Lifeline to be networked in with. And he said, well, you want to meet him? And I said, I suppose so. He says, I'm getting together with him here at 1 o'clock. Come on over and join us. And so I went over and I crashed their party. I guess it was the next day, actually. I got that wrong. So I met with him, and I got to meet Randy there and to learn a little bit about his ministry and the ministry of David's Hope. I'd heard of it, and I think I liked him on their Facebook page. So that was the extent of my involvement up till that point. But I wanted to find out more. And then we visited, and I said, I would love for you to come to our church and share, because I don't like for you guys to be ignorant. I'm fighting it. You're a good... Yeah, and so I wanted you to know these guys, and I wanted you to be familiar with their ministry, and if it's something that your heart's passionate about, then it gives you an opportunity to be involved. I don't think everybody's supposed to be involved with every ministry. I think that God specifically calls people, but if you don't become aware, then you never have that opportunity. And so once I learned about him, I said, well, come and share with us. And he's going to come up here and visit.
Good morning, everyone. I want to, first of all, so this is my wife, Lynette, and I'm Randy Jackson. And first I want to say thank you, Pastor Brian, so much for allowing us to come and share with your church this morning. It really means a lot to us. And for the reason you said, it's important for people to know about what we do, not only if you want to get involved, but in case you've been through what we're going to talk about this morning. So first of all, a little bit about who we are. David's Hope is, we are a bereavement ministry, which means we deal with grief and tragedy, but specifically people who have been through miscarriage, stillbirth, and early infant loss. Those are difficult topics, but and they're topics that don't get talked about a lot. For a lot of years, people, when they go through those kind of losses, they don't really talk about them. And we're kind of getting to a point in our culture where we're starting to talk about it a little bit, but it's because of people who have said, it's time for people to stop carrying grief alone and really getting out and putting the narrative out there. When we first got involved, it was actually, before we got involved, we found out about miscarriage the hard way. In 2008, we had a baby. We had 2 kids. We were pregnant with our 3rd child, and we were excited about the 3rd child coming. And at our 12-week doctor appointment, we'd already been to the doctor a few times. We'd heard the heartbeat, and knew that it was going to be a little boy. And 12-week appointment, we went in just for a normal day, normal appointment. And that's when we heard those really kind of crushing words you hear sometimes. I can't find the heartbeat. That's really devastating. It's really devastating as a parent when you like, oh, well, what does that mean? And that was my first question to the doctor. Well, what does that mean? What do you mean you can't find the heartbeat? And then when the doctor has to explain to you because you can't comprehend and you can't, rationalize this idea that this baby inside the womb has passed away. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. We went from not knowing anybody that had a miscarriage to knowing everybody that had had a miscarriage. Lots of people. And even more so as we kind of went through the process learning, and a lot of people don't realize 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. That's a lot. 24,000 babies die in stillbirth every year. That's a little bit later in the later term in the pregnancy. That's a lot. And people don't talk about it. People don't talk about losing babies. Lynette went and saw a man by the name of Dr. Alan Wolfelt. He's an international expert on grief. And she went and heard him speak. And one of the things he said that really caught my attention is that miscarriage is the second most neglected area of grief in America. People go through it and they neglect it. They don't want to deal with it. Either they don't want to deal with the grief, or the people around them are telling them, don't deal with it. Just move on. You can always get pregnant again. It's not like you really had the baby. Those are things that we heard. So we decided that it's kind of important to put something out there to help people through it. We wish that there was resources to help us. So it's like, well, why not create something to help people have resources, to help them deal with the grief, to help them move through the process. We don't want people to neglect the grief. But not only that, but as Christians, right? Paul writes in Romans 12:15 to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those who weep. Well, how do you do that if it's not being talked about? So, okay, well, let's create something to help people have something, opportunity to talk about. And so we came up with David's Hope. Now, David's Hope is not named after one of our boys. We had 2 miscarriages, and our boys were Isaiah and Eliezer, so not David. But we named David's Hope after King David, who in 2 Samuel chapter 12 lost a baby. A lot of people talk about all the great things he did and accomplished as a king and as a warrior. But there's this little passage where he loses a baby. And he fasts and he prays for the child. They knew that the baby was going to die, but he fasted and he prayed for the child and, did the whole sackcloth and ashes thing. And then when he perceived the baby passed, he got up, he washed himself, and he began eating a meal. And his servants came to him because they were like, well, we thought you were going to go kind of, you were so distressed over the baby being sick. And they wanted to know about his response. And David responded by saying, my son has passed away. One day I will go to him, but he won't come to me. In other words, what David's hope was that there was going to be a day when he was going to be with his child again. That death isn't the end. That his baby was safe in the arms of God. But one day he would get to see his child again. And so that's what we convey to people, is that there's, not only are you not alone, if you've been through miscarriage or stillbirth or early infant loss, not only are you not alone, you don't have to bear that grief by yourself, but there's a God who loves you, who loves your child, and will, through faith in Christ, one day reunite you with your child, and you can hold your baby for all eternity. That's an amazing hope to have. So that's something we try and communicate with people, to help them understand that this silent tragedy is not something they have to go through by themselves. They have a God who cares about them, and they have a community of people who cares about them. So that's a little bit about us, and I'll let my wife tell you a little bit about what we do.
Okay, you guys. First of all, the song, It Is Well, I love that song. If you guys have never researched the history on that song, I highly recommend you do it, because that song is about the peace and hope that we have in Christ in unimaginable devastation. So I just love that song. Thank you for playing it. So some of the things that we offer through David's Hope is we do offer a 6 weeks support group, and then it's followed by a 6-week Bible study. We also offer one-on-one counseling, ongoing counseling. And just so you guys know, we don't just serve locally. We serve all across the United States, and we're in 8 different countries. And so, maybe the support groups are unique to here. We do the counseling through FaceTime on social media. We're able to meet with these people, men and women. Something people think is, pregnancy loss is a woman's issue. They're the ones that are carrying the baby. It's a family issue. We have seen grandparents devastated by the loss. How hard is it to be a grandparent? And not only did you lose the same hopes and dreams for that baby, but you're helpless sometimes to be able to walk your child through that grieving process. It affects brothers and sisters of the baby. It's a family issue, and so I just want to clear that up. And we do counsel men as well. We have awareness events. We have memorial services. We actually have what's called funeral kits that we will give to a pastor if a client comes up to us and they're like, I would like to have this funeral service, so that we can help the pastor arrange a service. That sometimes it's kind of hard to do when it's miscarriage, and how to get the church involved and things like that. And then probably one of our most popular things that we do, and this is where we are so grateful for the community here in the Treasure Valley, is our memory boxes, and you'll see them over there. These are care boxes, because it is hard to come home after going through labor and have nothing. No pictures, no memories, nothing. and there's no proof of your baby's existence. And we send these boxes all over. And they're made by just everyday people that can crochet, knit, quilt, and they make and we put together these boxes after talking to the families to find out what they need. And we send that, and at least then they have something. And they come with a naming certificate. We do naming ceremonies. And I cannot tell you, there's no words to express how amazing this opportunity is evangelism-wise. Because nobody gets a box without calling, and we've got to talk to them first. And they're going to hear testimonies, they're going to hear the gospel, and that gospel presentation is pretty spectacular, I got to tell you. And what I mean by that is, one example is in Pakistan. It's a hard place to be a woman. And Muslim women, their value is in the ability to bear children. And I had a lady that had contacted us, and we kind of talked a little bit through Messenger and stuff, and then we started doing FaceTime. And we've walked her through the process, and we've walked her into her rainbow baby. But it was so cool one day when we were FaceTiming. She goes, "I know who you pray to. Don't say his name out loud," because she didn't want her husband to know. And she says, but keep praying for me. And that opportunity, a little bit at a time, to present Jesus in a place where she shouldn't be exposed to that, where, it's dangerous, is a beautiful testimony. We have a lady in Australia that we're 2 years ongoing discipleship online because she couldn't find anything. So the gospel's always being presented, because really, does hope or healing come from anywhere except from Christ, right? So these are some of the opportunities that are presented through David's Hope, and we're always evolving and changing. We have upcoming events in Caldwell, and one of those exciting events is tomorrow, that your mayor is doing a proclamation acknowledging October as Pregnancy and Infant Awareness Loss Month. And also your beautiful city has donated a place at Canyon Hill, and there'll be a dedication coming up this Saturday at 11 o'clock at Canyon Hill, dedicating that. And so that's what that brick's about, and you guys can come and talk to us one-on-one, because we don't want to take up too much of your time. There's a lot of good things coming, and with hope and healing and the gospel presentation, I think you can see a big change in little things happening in your city.
And I'll just also add, we also have a candlelight vigil. So October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month.
And they can get their bracelet to remember to pray.
Yeah, you can get a bracelet.
Pray.
But also, just to let you know, so October 12th, October 15th, Tuesday night, and this is something that we actually just started last year. The event we didn't start last year, but where it's going to be at. So she mentioned the Caldwell Memorial that's going to be dedicated Saturday, October 12th. Nampa actually did it last year, so we have a permanent pregnancy loss memorial both in Nampa and now Caldwell this year, which is really exciting. Both cities, their city government said, we need to have a place where families can go. Because if you lose a brother or a sister or a parent, you have a place to go to reflect on them. But if you lose a baby, especially in pregnancy loss, not so much. So these two cities have said we need to have a place for families to be, where they can go and reflect and grieve. And so Nampa, on October 15th, we're doing a candlelight vigil, and that information will be over there as well. But as she said, this is a great opportunity. This is a great mission field that we have. We do consider it, Christ reaching out to these people. Like she said, we try and help people see the hope and the love of God. So I'll close off by telling you some of the ways you can help. First of all, I'll say, if you've been through miscarriage or stillbirth, please come talk to us. We would love to talk with you. We'd love to hear about your baby. We would love to hear and help out in any way we can. As far as how can you help financially, obviously is always good. We never charge anybody for our services. The memory boxes we send out a few hundred every year, and we never charge anybody anything because hope and healing should be free. We want these people to have these as gifts. So all the supply costs and the shipping costs, that's all stuff that we have to raise money for. Also, if you can make baby blankets or baby booties or anything like that, please, we would love to talk to you because, or scrapbookers if you want to make cards, sorry, to go into the things, in the memory boxes. Be supportive of the people you know that have been through miscarriage or stillbirth, and pray for families. And finally, I'll tell you, so the Caldwell Memorial in spring of 2020, there's going to be a pathway put from the road to the memorial area with bricks. And if you've been through loss, you can purchase a brick and have your baby's name engraved on it and be a part of that permanent memorial. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come and talk to us. We would love to. And thank you again, Pastor Brian, for allowing us to come and share. We really appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
You know, I really appreciate when somebody takes off in a ministry like that, because those grassroots ministries, I know how they're funded. You know, I mean, when you start like something like that and you start it up, we all know how those are funded. There's donations that come in, but we also know where most of the money comes from to do it. You know, I mean, Chi Coffee, I'm sure the same thing. I tell Heather, go get a real job. You know, but you know, it's the people who do that really pay the price, and that's a real calling from the Lord. So we're going to take, not yet, at the end, we're going to take an offering for David's Hope, because I want to give you an opportunity to give to that if you would like to. But I was looking forward. We had a young lady who was going to come to speak to us. Where's Pam at?
Since Amber's not here, I just thought I'd sort of give a testimony of myself, just of what working in Embrace Grace has meant to me. And there are a lot of religious people in the world, people who are pious and who want to do the right thing, a variety of religions. But I think I would be that person no matter where I lived. I would probably want to be following the rules, because I'm a rule follower. And but what I'm learning about Jesus is that it's really about forgiveness and love and grace, and that's what sets Christianity apart. And I'm learning to live in that grace and in that love. And I'm actually an introvert, so it's kind of strange that God pulls me into these ministries, but I'm learning to love these girls. I mean, just, you know, they're not a project. Maybe in my task-oriented nature, it's a religious project, but they're not a project. I'm learning to love them, and they're so lovable, and I can see why God loves them. And Jessica Lee, I think, is a lot like me, as she's shared about herself, and she's very responsible. You can see she showed up when no one else did, and that's me. But it's just a privilege to get to know them and see their hearts open to God's love. And so I hope that you are able to participate in the baby shower in any way that you can. If you don't want to go out and get a gift, we have a couple large items that we need. So if you want to just donate some money toward that, you can talk to Pat or myself. Lifeline has been great to donate some car seats to us, but some of the girls don't need car seats. So, and then we would love to have people involved. If you have a story in your life of an adoption or an unplanned pregnancy, an abortion, anything that you would be willing to share with these girls, they would appreciate it so much, just to see how God has worked in your life through any of those issues. So any questions, just talk to any of us. Thanks.
I'm always going to find an excuse to speak about Esther, because she's my favorite story in the Bible. So we're going to be in Esther today. I did want to kind of, I guess, give you a little backstory of my relationship with the book of Esther, and then backstory of the book of Esther. So I had never totally read through the whole book. It was never a part of children's quizzing, and that's when I would read books full through. So talk to children's quizzing, I guess. And but I'd always kind of heard the story. And right before my senior year of high school, I went to Ecuador. And I went on a mission trip for a month. And one night, the missionaries I was staying with were like, "Oh, pick a movie. You can watch any movie you want." And I was like, "What's this movie?" And it was called One Night with the King. And I was like, "That sounds shady, guys. Like, you're missionaries." And they were like, "It's the story of Esther." And I was like, "I know that story. I've watched VeggieTales. Like, I'm good. But thank you." And I watched it, and I just fell in love with the story in a way I had never fallen in love with it before. And there were so many pieces of it that I watched that I was like, I've never heard that piece of the story before. I didn't know that piece. And I had to go back and I had to reread it. And I found that I love this story because there's so many characters in it that are all very broken and in very tough situations. And that I think it's just a story of hope. At different times in my life when I read through it, I identify with different people in it, and I identify with who God wants me to be in those situations differently. So I probably read it 4 or 5 times a year straight through because I need it. And today Dad asked me to talk about hope, and I just feel like Esther is a great story of hope. So a little bit of backstory in case you haven't watched the VeggieTales. King Xerxes is the king of Persia, and he throws a big party, basically. And he wants to show off how beautiful his wife is. His wife, the Queen Vashti. And she says, "Not going to happen. Too bad. Figure it out yourself." In VeggieTales, she won't make him a sandwich. So, I mean, take it for what you want. So she refuses to show herself off to his guests. And he throws her out for this. She's no longer queen, and so he needs a new queen. And there's a woman named Hadassah, and we know her as Esther. And Hadassah is a Jew that lives in Persia, and she's rounded up with all the other young women to go see who's the most beautiful, who's the most worthy of the king, the great king, I guess. And she has a cousin, Mordecai. And her cousin Mordecai, she becomes queen, and her cousin Mordecai at one point overhears a story or a plot to kill the king. And so he tells Esther, and Esther goes and tells the king. And so Mordecai is now, saved the king. After this, there's a man named Haman, and Haman becomes second in command. And, he lets it get to his head. People get to bow down to him. It's like a pretty sweet gig, I guess. I don't know. But Mordecai says, "I will not bow to you. You are not my king, and you are not my God. And so I won't bow to you, Haman." But Haman's head is too big for that. So he makes a plan to kill all of the Jews that are in Persia. And that's where we pick this up, is that this plot that Haman has, this decree that he's created, has now been sent out across the land. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. And I thought that was kind of interesting, that they talked about how David did that too. It was a form of this very visual way for you to see that they were in mourning. So Mordecai made it very clear that he was upset in a very physical and outwardly and expressive way. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court..." Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. And I think this is probably one of the most powerful passages in all of Scripture, for me at least. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Mordecai had a lot of hope in a very hopeless situation. The first thing is that he hoped for victory. His hope was set in who God was going to, in the fact that God was going to be victorious in this situation, even though everything was stacked against them. He was unwavering in his faith. In Esther 4:14, it says that it will arise. Deliverance will arise from somewhere else. He wasn't saying it might arise. He was sure that the Jews were going to be saved from this. It was the question of if Esther was going to be included. Deuteronomy 24 says, "For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory." Mordecai knew who was fighting the battle. He knew that it wasn't a battle for him, and it wasn't a battle for Esther. It was a battle for God. I was thinking about, what are experiences in my life where I felt like I was going to win even though it was a hopeless situation. And it made me reminisce back to being a young little child. And I had a friend named Ryan, and we would wrestle my dad. And we were both little, like Olivia's size, I don't know. And when we would wrestle, the way he would get us to stop wrestling him is he would put our hands in his mouth. He'd stick our hand in his mouth, and then, you had to run off, and you had to wash your hands. And one day, Ryan comes to me before we wrestled Dad, and he goes, "Listen, I figured it out." And I was like, "Okay, I got this." He goes, "You don't wash your hands till you're done." He goes, "We're going to go wash our hands, and then we're going to come back here and fight again, and we're going to have to go wash our hands again. So we just got to keep going until we're all the way done." And I was sure that was going to be the way we became victorious. We still weren't. Okay? We still lost because our hands were small enough to fit in his mouth. So we were small. But we were sure we'd outsmarted him at this point. And we had all of this trust in our strength. But Mordecai's faith was in someone who can be victorious. It was in someone much bigger than any of the people that he was fighting. Secondly, Mordecai had faith in the unknown, had hope in the unknown. Mordecai had no idea how victory would arise. He doesn't say, "And deliverance will come from here," or "Deliverance will come from over here." I've got it planned. I've got plan A, B, and C for God. His answer is, hope will deliverance will arise. It will come. Regardless of how or when, it will come. He hoped, even though he didn't know what was coming. In this situation, Mordecai had no power. He couldn't be the one to address the king. And he even goes as far to say that if Esther doesn't, her father's family will perish. And I started to wonder, does that mean that he believed that without Esther, he would perish too? He had no power in this situation, and he didn't even know if he would be able to survive this situation. But he still hoped in the victory and the unknown of how it was going to come. He still didn't compromise. Even with no power, with not knowing how the victory was going to come, and with even the threat of his own death, he did not compromise on who he was. He was committed. And he never apologized for his actions. This time reading through Esther, I started to realize something, which was that Mordecai was kind of at fault for this whole thing. It was kind of Mordecai's fault, right? Haman chose to do this because he was so angry at Mordecai. He wasn't angry at the Jewish people. He was angry at Mordecai. And not once does Mordecai say, "I'm so sorry, I should have just bowed to him." We may not know where our deliverance is going to come from or if we're going to be the one that gets delivered, but we can be sure of one thing, which is that at the end of the day, God will provide victory to those who are faithful. And we can hope in that. And we need to be committed to that. And then lastly, reading through this, I realized that there's a lot of hope in the role that we play in spite of ourselves in God's story. So there were 4 people that I thought were kind of cool. Hathach was used in spite of his position. He was kind of like a nobody. The fact that he's even mentioned is kind of impressive to me. He was a eunuch. He was someone who served Esther. But the only way that Mordecai got his message to Esther was through Hathach. All of the deliverance that comes after it, the rest of the story, comes through the communications that happen from a nobody. In spite of where we are, maybe we're not the most powerful or the richest or the most skilled in every way. It doesn't mean that we can't be a part and a vessel for what God needs others to hear. Esther was used in spite of her fear. Mordecai really didn't accept her excuse, which I kind of love. She's like, "It's not going to work. I can't go before the king. I'm not allowed." And Mordecai goes, "Figure it out, dude. I don't know. Sorry." And in spite of her fear, she went and she was faithful and she was used. Xerxes was used in spite of his mistakes. One of the things as you're reading about Haman making this decree to kill all of the Jews is that Xerxes puts his seal on it. And at the end of the story, Xerxes uses his seal to allow for the Jews to assemble and to defend themselves. So in spite of his mistake, in spite of the fact that he was the one who gave the power to Haman in the beginning, he is also the one who gives the power to the Jews in order for them to be the ones to save themselves. And lastly, the Jews were used in spite of their powerlessness. They were dispersed throughout Persia. It's why Haman could do what he did, was because they weren't powerful. They weren't in positions of power. They were actually the slaves. Part of the command that Mordecai and Xerxes bring is that they're actually allowed to assemble themselves. They weren't even allowed to assemble up until this point. But they become victorious, regardless of their powerlessness, because they have hope in the victory and hope in the God that brings the victory. And I think this is the thing that I've really been mulling over the last week, is that regardless of your fear or your mistakes or the position you have in life or how powerful you are or how powerless you are, you can hold out hope. Hope that there is victory. Hope that God will bring the right things at the right time, even if you don't know what they are. but biggest is hope in the role that we get to play in his story. All of these people had huge parts of the story, and they got to be a beautiful story in and of themselves that you can watch with Veggie Tales anytime you want because they were all faithful. Hathach obeyed Esther. Esther obeyed and listened and was faithful to Mordecai. Xerxes, in his own way, was faithful to the Jewish people, and the Jews were faithful to their God. We have hope when we are faithful.
Thanks for joining us today. You can find Eustick Road Church of the Nazarene on the web at eusticknaz.org and on many social media sites at eusticknaz. Thanks, and God bless.